In this video, I'm going to show you how I stitch my circles. As you can see, I've already prepared my square. I've stitched around the outside and I've added the button. Now, the next step is to bring up the needle right next to the button. And to do that, I press the button into the fabric and from the back, find the spot right next to the button and pull the needle through. Now, to make my stitches, I use the button as a guide. So my first stitch is going to go in there right next to the button, and it will come up right next to the button as well. And the second stitch, I'll make that in the same way. Just keep pressing your button down into your fabric. Don't make your stitches too big, because if you make them too big, they won't be following the button anymore, but they will be going wherever they want to go. So make your stitches the right size to follow the button. And don't worry if you think they're looking a little bit wonky. When you finish stitching, you won't see anything of the wonky stitches anymore. So just stitch along, keep following the button. Don't make your stitches too big and you'll be fine. Now, obviously this is easier with a flat button than with a button which has a shank. So if you're new to doing this, I would advise using an easy button till you know how to do it, and then you can go for more difficult ones. Now we're getting to the last stitch, and this is always a bit, sometimes you have to fudge it a bit, because this space it's too big for one stitch and too small for two stitches. So depending a bit, I will either do two smaller stitches. So yes, my stitches are not all the same size, even though you may think so. Or sometimes you can get away with doing a slightly larger stitch. Okay, so that's the first circle done, just following the button. Now, next step, your threads on the back, you bring your needle up again, leave the space you want between your two circles. Now I'm usually at about 1/8 of an inch, maybe a little bit more, sometimes a bit less. It doesn't really matter all that much. Now what I do now is I use the thread to help me get the stitches in the circle. So I put my needle right next to where the thread comes out of the fabric, and I make my first stitch, and then it comes up just a little bit further on. That's the first stitch. Now you can see it's a bit wonky. Don't worry, just leave it wonky. And then you do that again. You put your needle right next to the thread and have it come up a little bit further on, and you do it again, and again. Now of course, if you want, you can mark your circles, but it's a lot of extra work, and I just want to stitch, not mark. So I haven't marked any of my circles on any of the pieces I've done. My circles certainly aren't perfect, but because of all the stitching, you can't really see that they're not perfect. So my advice would be to do more stitching, not less stitching if you feel your circles aren't perfect. Because the more stitching you do, the less the imperfection you see will show. There you go. Coming back to the beginning of the circle now. And here it's the same story, you know, just figure out more or less how many stitches you can get in to get it finished. See my wonky first stitch? Okay, another circle done. And then again, put your needle in where you want your next circle to start. I'll try not to do a wonky one this time. And start stitching again. And just kind of eyeball the distance between your lines. And they won't be perfect, but don't worry too much about that. Because if you see at a certain point that you've got more space left on one side than on the other side, you can just do a little bit wider on that side and a little bit tighter on this side to get it right. That's what I do. But I think the most important thing is to do a lot of stitching, because that's what effectively hides any imperfections that you may have made. So once again, to remind you, put your needle right next to the thread. Decide how big you want to make your stitch. Go down, bring it up again, and keep on doing that. And I think actually this is the trick that keeps my circles reasonably perfect. Putting your needle right next to the thread so that you're in line with the stitch that went before. Almost done this one as well. And that's it, another circle done. Okay, so you can see how I've stitched my circles. See my wonky stitch sitting there? I'm not worried. Once it's finished, of course it's still there, but it's not going to bother you. So don't worry about your own wonky stitches. Just, you know, start stitching and keep stitching. And the other thing I do is, if you look at my circles, I stitch right to the edge. And I think that's one of the other things that makes them look really good. If you may think, okay, I've done 2 or 3 circles, now I'm going to stop. But really filling up your square is what makes them look really good. So you might want to have a go at that. You don't have to. If you think yours are great with just a couple of circles, that's fine too. But it's one of the reasons I fill them up, because I feel mine look better if they're stitched to the edge. And of course, because I really, really love stitching. So I hope this was helpful. and I look forward to hearing your comments on this, and happy stitching.